Thank you. Thank you, Peg. So, a curious title, Where the Dead Pause and the Japanese Say Goodbye. This is a photo of where the dead pause and where the Japanese and really anybody can say goodbye. And this is, it's the top of an extinguished volcano, which is called Osorezan in Japanese, which loosely translates to Mount Doom. Sometimes guidebooks will translate it to Mount Fear or Mount Terror. And the original title of the book was going to be The Journey to Mount Doom. And the marketing people said, the audience might be confused as to what land your book is set in. And so they said, what are the alternate translations? And I said, Mount Fear and Mount Terror. And they said, Mount Fear sounds like Cape Fear, and we can't use the word terror anymore, ever. So now it's just Where the Dead Pause. And essentially, this is a very sacred site in Japan, and it was probably sacred to the indigenous people of Japan, like before the Japanese got there, because that happened there too. And it is, in fact, where the souls of the dead will pause, and where you can go and intercept them and say goodbye. And there is a river which runs from the top of this actually, it runs from the top of the volcano, the extinguished volcano, down to the ocean, and it's kind of like the river Styx. And so when one dies, one marches up the river and crosses a bridge and meets a creature who, I'm very sorry, even though I'm in Sausalito, there's no PC way to translate her name. She is the old hag. And she will take your skin or your clothing, depending on how much money you died with and how much money your family has. And then after those things are removed from you, you are stuck on a tree and wade, and if you break the branch, that means you are very bad. And reincarnation is a little bit more difficult. So a very strange figure, the old hag. And in fact, nobody knows where she came from. She predates the introduction of Buddhism to Japan. She probably predates what is considered the indigenous religion of Japan. And when I went to Mount Doom, there was a statue of her there. And while I was coming down off of Mount Doom with a character known in my book as the Mountain Woman, I was told that the other end of the river Styx also has a temple. And did I want to visit? And I said, sure. This is, I'll read you this. What happens? I was worried the whole time if I was a bad parent or not. You'll understand why. So this is my visit to the other temple at the other end of the river Styx in Japan. All this is true, by the way. I'm not just making this up. The mountain woman strode off across the parking lot while ordering me to keep my son away from the dog, who was chained to a pole. I did as she said, following her. She made a wide berth around the dog to the door of a large rectangular greenhouse. She yanked open the door, and immediately the greenhouse exhaled, sending out a strong, hot breath of manure and freshly trimmed stems. There was a tangle of orange, red, and white orchids inside. The flowers had been indulged and allowed to grow however they chose, so they clutched each other like incestuous siblings. There were little potted roses and ferns. I stared at the exotic richness. Even the mountain woman paused to take in the unexpected sight of the disordered tropical splendor. Then she gathered herself again. A man sat in the front corner of the greenhouse. He wore dusty clothing and a pair of long green rubber boots. He hadn't shaved that day, and the hair on his head was about an inch long, a thick carpet of stubble that made him look like a monchichi, the Japanese toy from the 1980s. But this man, with his unattended head of hair, could not possibly be a Buddhist priest, as no vigilant priest would allow his personal grooming to deteriorate to such a degree. "Hello," the mountain woman began. She explained who I was and why I was here, while the dog barked outside. "Okay," the man said gruffly. He pulled off one of his boots and placed his foot inside a sneaker. Then he began to tug on the other boot. "Go back, and I'll meet you there." The mountain woman nodded and turned crisply. "Come on, then." I followed her back to the temple, making sure that my son, who was 3, and I skirted the dog. I helped my son up onto the landing. By now the priest had returned from his greenhouse and gruffly gestured us to come into his temple. "You're on your own now," the mountain woman waved to me. She and my mother drove off to go buy some seaweed, and my son and I followed the fuzzy-headed priest, as I would come to call him, into his temple. As we were walking up the landing, my son Ewan paused to admire one of the dragonfly toys, and the fuzzy-headed priest picked it up and put it into my son's hands. "Take it," he said delightedly. The inside of this temple was quite small, and the gold on the decorations very bright and new. And I asked the priest how old his temple was. Gone was the disgruntled gardener, and in his place now was a man who delighted in telling his story. He had a bit of mischief on his face, and though I liked this about him, it made me nervous. "Come here," he said. "Come onto the altar and stand right here." He gestured to a spot just in front of a closed box. Come on," he said, gently, waving us up onto the landing. I held my son's hand. The priest disappeared, but I could still hear him talking to us. "Are you there? You are facing the box. Yes? Please look at the box. Make sure you are looking. Okay. 1, 2, 3. The doors of the box swung open. The figure seated in the box thrust forward. It was the terrifying, skeletal face of the old hag, Shozoku no Baba. My son let go of my hand and immediately ran away. "Do you see it?" the priest asked gleefully. "Yes, isn't she terrifying?" "Yes," I said, turning around, searching for my son. "I'm sorry, but my son, I want you to walk to the side and look at the old hag from the side." I could hear my son moving around somewhere within the temple. He'd run off so suddenly, I hadn't seen in which direction he had gone. "Are you looking?" asked the priest. I stepped to the right. "Yes," I said. "Good." He came around the corner, very pleased with himself. "Were you scared?" "Well, yes." "Isn't she ugly?" "Very ugly," I agreed. "But look at her from the side. Look." His mood had changed now and become somehow gentle. Isn't her expression different from the side? In fact, it was. The old hag was a statue made of wood and rigged on a platform so she could jump out like a jack-in-the-box. From the front, the old hag was terrifying, all tongue and teeth and skull. But from the side, the hag's expression took on a look of sadness, fatigue, and pity. She looked almost grandmotherly. The old priest told me that once upon a time pilgrims crossed the Red Bridge at Mount Doom and then met face to face with a statue of the old hag. But then Mount Doom had become quite commercialized, and the main goal of the priest who ran it was to make money. The true faithful, he said, came here to his temple because it was right here that the river started. This was where the souls of the dead began their walk, and true pilgrims knew this and came to pay their respects. The business of death, he explained, was just as shocking as the old hag looked, but from the side, I could see that she was sad too, and that she had pity for the poor souls over whose fate she ruled. In all my years of visiting Japanese temples, I had never seen an old hag enshrined as the main entity, and I told him so. "That's right," he said happily. "I'm very rare." For months, I could not shake the image of terrifying old Baba, the hag who keeps the souls of lost children stuck on the side of the river and who takes away the clothes and skin of the newly dead, and the sad and kind old hag whom I had seen when I looked at her from the side. I knew why the old hag had such a frightening face. I really hated feeling lost in the abyss of grief, and I often hated the person that I was, this person who was so unhappy all of the time. I had to rein in what she said, lest other people know how unhappy she was. Not long after my father died, my husband said to me, "Grief is a form of love, isn't it? And isn't love a form of madness?" I guessed that the side of Baba's face represented a form of love. But it didn't make sense to me that a being who tortured little children could have anything to do with love. And many more months later, I started to think about her a little differently. She, whose job it is to terrify and to torment, knew exactly how horrible her actions were, and a part of her grieved to have to do this to us. But her job was also necessary and unstoppable. For months, I had been looking to return my life to the way it had been before my father and my grandparents had died. And when I couldn't do that, when I couldn't bring them out of the underworld, I had felt the touch of madness. Old Baba, the old hag, had been trying to tell me that it would be impossible to heal my wound by resurrecting anyone who was dead. If I insisted on trying to do this unfeasible thing, then the world would only be reflected back to me as it appeared in old Baba's most obvious expression, with fury and with scorn. Indeed, this was how my surroundings had appeared to me for a long time. But if I went about things another way, if I could in fact accept that my world had forever changed, then I could see grief as it was depicted from the side of Baba's face, with sadness, but with compassion for others. Having once seen the face of deep grief, though, I did not think it was possible to go back to a point in life when I didn't know old Baba had existed at all. Thank you.